right to it and learn a little bit about Robin. So Robin, thanks for joining us. Hello, hello.
Hi,
Thanks,
everyone.
Robin.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm sorry my webcam isn't working, but hopefully I can make up for it.
Safe to say that you're an artist and a scientist. So tell me about that.
Well, I thought I was going to be an artist for my professional work, and I did go to the Kansas City Art Institute and graduated in sculpture and ceramics. But then I had always had a avid interest in natural history, nature, animals. I was interested in fossils, but I didn't know anything about them. And the first time I visited Chicago, I decided that I needed to work at the Field Museum. And so out of art school, I did get a job in exhibits at the Field Museum, building exhibits, and then went on to design exhibits. But in the meantime, was playing softball with a bunch of Field Museum exhibits and scientific staff, and asked one of the curators, John Flynn, if I could go into the field with him, not really understanding what that meant, and completely fell in love with it. And with a lot of wonderful support from the scientific staff, especially in zoology at the Field Museum and in paleontology, I ended up going to grad school and started a profession in paleontology.
And how fabulous is that? We work with our girls club members and we say, you know, your career path might not always be as straightforward, but if you follow your passions and you try things and you go outside of the box and you push yourself, you're gonna fall into something that you love. So that sounds like what happened with your route, which is so incredible. I know you've been to some incredible places for digs and on excavation sites. Tell me, what's some of your best spots that you've been to?
Oh gosh, I've been really fortunate, especially when I was in grad school, to go to Madagascar, and I've been there 5 times. I worked with several different crews, actually 3 different crews, looking for fossils in different age sediments in Madagascar. What an incredible place. I highly recommend Madagascar. It's beautiful. But I've also looked at fossils in a lot of museum collections across, especially the Southern Hemisphere and across Europe and in the States. So being a grad student and being able to get grants and support, which took me a while to figure out how to do because I didn't know how to do it. So try again, right? That was really fun and really rewarding. Meeting the people who are both living in these places where the fossils are, but also working in the collections, and people who worked with us out in the field. Super fun. Great experiences.
That is awesome. I know that you take students out on digs as well, and we're going to show a little video about it actually. I pulled up here one of your favorite places to go to, the Petrified Forest.
Woohoo!
So yeah, woohoo. I found this little video when I was doing my research on you and your work. So let's play this because I wanted to really have people get a sense of just how incredible your work is and get a feel for what you do and how hands-on you are with your students at Columbia College. Oops, are we
Let's talk about grammar play. Anytime you type or text.
Oops. Okay, yes, I think this is the right. There we go. I want to skip through the answer.
Grammarly provides quality suggestions.
Problems.
Like I was familiar with Robin Whatley, but yeah, I took a class where she was a teacher, and yeah, she told me about this, and I was interested.
I had started teaching a class called Paleontology Observation and Methods out in the Petrified Forest National Park, where I do my own paleontology research. And I took students out there, and that's the mural that you see behind you, out in the Badlands of the Petrified Forest National Park. And so that class is built around the students making observations about the natural world, about the plants, about the animals that they see, but also about the science that they're learning about.
That's a major key, combining science with art, because there's a lot of art into science. Like it's a lot of detail and specifics in science that you could really take on with different techniques.
Because I do see people drawing in here, and there are all these specimens that you wouldn't normally have access to. Okay, so everywhere that you see one of these little targets, you can download an app called Daiquiri, and if you hold it up to the target, you will get extra information. So you'll see photographs, or you'll see me talking about the field site, or you'll see photographs of fossils.
Awesome. So Robin, let's get right to it. I think that was a wonderful introduction. I'm going to go ahead now and make you a presenter. I know you have a fantastic slideshow to share with us and lots of great information to shine a spotlight on how birds are avian dinosaurs. So everybody, if you have questions for Professor Whatley as this presentation is going on, please drop your questions into the GoToWebinar control panel, and I will try to get to all of your questions. And yeah, let's enjoy.
Hi, everybody. I'm really, really excited to be here and talk with you about the evolutionary history of birds, their dinosaurian history, really. So let me just to repeat, I'm at Columbia College Chicago, and I have been there for since 2006. And before that, I did a postdoc at the Smithsonian Institution with my colleague Kay Behrensmeyer, who you'll see in a minute, and who I've done some field research with. Let me see. There we go. So while I don't have a slide with my students, the classes that I've been running in the Petrified Forest National Park, what you're seeing on the screen here are some of my colleagues, both at the National Museum of Natural History, from the park, and also some students who have gone into the field with us. So if some of my family is watching, they might recognize the young lady in the bright blue shirt. That is my niece, Paloma, who expressed an interest in going into the field with me, and was my field assistant in 2011 when she was a freshman in high school. So that was pretty wonderful. She had never camped before. And it reminded me of myself the first time that I went into the field. So it's an adventure, but it's really worth it. The Petrified Forest National Park is a place that I've been working since 2009. And my main working colleague is Kay Behrensmeyer. She's standing here with the white hat and the cream-colored shirt. And she is a taphonomist at the National Museum of Natural History. And she's also a geologist, and she studies how animals live, are buried, and fossilized. And she's an amazing researcher who's been working in Kenya for much of her career on living animals there. Some of the other people that you can see around the screen are people who have worked on the fossils that we've collected in the Petrified Forest National Park, which is in Arizona. The black arrow on the left of the upper screen points to the Petrified Forest National Park. A major highway runs sort of through the middle of it, and it is halfway between Flagstaff in Arizona and Albuquerque in New Mexico. And these areas up in the northern part of the park, one of them is has a red square around it on the left side of the screen, is the place that we've been working the most recently, and we found some amazing fossils there. So before I start talking with you about the evolutionary history of birds, I thought that it made sense to maybe tell you a little bit about the research we've been doing, since this is the time these sedimentary deposits are actually of the age that early dinosaurs are found in. And that is around late Triassic period. If any of you are familiar with the geologic time scale, around 200 to 227 million years are the sediments in the park. So let me just move forward here. Oh, there we go. I know this picture of me crouching over what looks like a pile of rubble was in some of the ad material. And I just wanted to say a little bit about what it takes to look for fossils. What you're looking at are a couple of different methods that we use. The group that's sitting here on this relatively flat butte that's kind of a pinkish orange color is our field crew, and my niece is there taking a little nap after a long, hard day in the field. And these white packages that are in the foreground are, even though it doesn't look like much, are actually the very carefully wrapped fossils that are in the matrix that we have dug out of the quarry. And if you look on the lower left-hand side, you see that it looks like some blocks have been taken out of the sediment. And these sediments actually have amazing fossils in them, most of them from relatively small animals, and the fossils themselves are very small. So there are a couple of ways that you can look for fossils. You can walk around and you can look really carefully at the ground. If you're young and you have great eyes, or if you have great glasses, you might be able to see some very small fossils like tiny teeth and bones. But there also are really large fossils in the petrified forest of animals that lived here in the past. And so we basically walk around, look at the ground, try to find bones or teeth. And if we find those things, we sit down and we look carefully. And if we're lucky, we find a quarry, which is what we're sitting on right here. And that is a layer that produces fossils. And so what we're doing is we're actually coring out these blocks so that we can take them back to the museum and look at them under the microscope. That's how small the fossils are. One other thing I'll mention is this red arrow over here is pointing to kind of a white stripe. If you follow it across the screen, that corresponds with the layer that we're standing on and the layer that the fossils have come out of. So that's representative of an environment. It's a snapshot in time of a channel complex. So water was moving through here, but very gently. It also has volcanic ash in it, and we have dated it, which is pretty unusual for Triassic fossils. So I just thought I would take a minute and say that paleontology, a lot of people confuse it with anthropology, and I bet most of you know, and I should have made this a poll question, that anthropology is really the study of humans, while paleontology, which means ancient life, although some humans have lived ancient lives, is non-humans typically. And so what we're trying to do is really get a handle on life through time. And that tells us something about life on Earth at the moment. And we're also looking at the ecology, the past environments, and how animals have evolved through time. And there's so much to it. It's really, really interesting and fun, actually. What you're seeing, whoops, sorry about that. Not sure why it does that. It's kind of weird. What you're seeing here is a representative array of the animals that we have fossils from in the park from this specific time period. And it's a pretty amazing diversity of animals and also environments. We have animals that are definitely meat eaters that live in the water. Some of these, like these giant phytosaurs, the crocodile-like looking things on the lower left, can be 30 feet long, if you can believe that. I mean, they're huge. There are amphibians, which is this large metoposaur. There are smaller versions of those guys, the Apachesaurus, and there's a fossil of a part of a jaw down below. There are fish, so you can see actinopterygian scales, fish scales, and teeth. And there are also animals that live mainly not in the water that are also eating other animals. And then there are animals that live mainly not in the water that are eating plants, or animals and plants. And so it's a pretty good variety of creatures here. This number 3 that I marked is, we think, a theropod tooth, so that it has the characteristics of a meat-eating dinosaur. And one thing that you might notice when you look at it is it looks very sharp. It's a little small to see this, but you might be able to see the kind of serrations, like a steak knife, on the right side that run up the ridge. That is very typical of theropod dinosaurs. It is also a little bit recurved, which is another characteristic of theropod dinosaurs. And I'll show you another picture of a tooth like that. Number 4 is Revoltosaurus. That's a kind of reptile that lives in the park that's really common. And one interesting thing is you can kind of tell a little bit about behavior by looking at this tooth that's on the far right. That's a wear facet. So it would be pointed, but it's worn down where the animal's been eating. A lot of these reptiles actually shed their teeth, and so there are tons of teeth around. They're constantly regrowing teeth and shedding them. There's a human outline over here. This is actually Bill Parker, who is one of the main paleontologists in the park and is responsible for getting a lot of other paleontologists working there and trying to determine what actually is in the park. And that's for scale, by the way. One of the really cool fossils that we found by looking in these fossil blocks, and an example is in the lower right, is a soft-shelled or a thin-shelled freshwater turtle. These are all freshwater sediments. I'm not sure, but let me see if I can get this little video. So Susie is our preparator at the Smithsonian, and she's the one who has worked on all of our fossils. And that little piece that she's holding is a piece of turtle shell. And you can see an example of this animal, Chinlicheles, which has been described. There's not very much material from it, but we have found quite a bit of turtle material in here. So we're working on the description for that. Here's another photograph of Susie working at the National Museum of Natural History, which is part of the Smithsonian, in the fossil lab, preparing our fossils. And one of these blocks has yielded a relatively small piece of pterosaur jaw. So it's very tiny. It's maybe 4+ centimeters long. This pterosaur is the early ancestor of all what you might know as pterodactyls. So these are flying reptiles. And I've put a little bracket where the jaw piece would be. You can see that it's got a tail. You can see the arms spread out and the wings and the legs hanging out behind. And then this picture in the lower left is a close-up of one of these teeth, and these teeth have wear facets on them. So if you look at them and you see that the tops are flat, that they're not broken, they are actually worn. So we just have this small piece of the pterosaur jaw, and the teeth are very characteristic. They're flattened. They have these multi-cusps on them, and the jaw bones are super long and super thin. So we're in the process of describing that. So now Holly, I believe, has poll question number 1.
All right, let me pull up the first poll question. You guys know we love our trivia. So our first question tonight, what do living birds and extinct pterodactyls have in common? Select one of the following: A, feathers; B, 4 bony limbs; C, they're both dinosaurs; or D, none of the above. So Robin, this is kind of an interesting question. I'll be interested to see how people are voting kind of across the board right now. And it looks like 31% of our audience has voted. So Robin, when you were in Madagascar, tell me about some of the animals that you found and studied there. That just sounds so awesome.
There are lots of dinosaurs there. So in the Cretaceous sediments that we worked in, I don't know if anybody here has heard of Mashikasaurus. That means, it's mean. It's like mean lizard. Mashika, Alika Mashika means mean dog. So that's the sign that you see on people's fences if they have a dog that they don't want, that they want you to beware of. And there are tons of crocodiles. I think there are 7 different kinds of crocodiles. One has a head that looks a lot like a hippopotamus, which is completely bizarre.
Wow.
There's another one that's got little teeth that are serrated that looks like it eats plants. So those were really cool, but they're also beautiful living animals. I know that most of you probably know that lemurs are only found in Madagascar, and there's so many different kinds.
Cool. I think we're just about to close the poll. So if you wanted to participate in this first trivia question, what do living birds and extinct pterodactyls have in common? Now is your time to vote, because I think most of our audience has cast their selections. Should we share the results? Oops, here we go. So 18% of our audience thought feathers. 36% thought 4 bony limbs are what they have in common. 41% said C, they're both dinosaurs, and 5% said none of the above. So Robin, what is the answer here? What do living birds and extinct pterodactyls have in common?
Okay, so the 36% has it. So is my screen still shared?
4 bony limbs. Let me close this out and get you back on, and now we see your images again.
Okay, so we've got a bird on the right, and we've got a pterodactyl, I think it's a pteranodon, on the left, and you can see the bird's arms, even though they're covered with feathers, and you can see the bird's feet, right? And they have a bony skeleton. And if you look at the pteranodon, you can see the feet out behind, you can see the body, and trust me, it has a bony skeleton. You saw the jaw, and then you can see the arms, and the wing flaps are actually leathery. They are not feathers. However, they do have kind of a fuzz, almost like fur. It isn't fur specifically, but it is almost like a fur. So in other words, there is something they both have in common. While they don't share feathers, they do share kind of a sort of covering probably for keeping warm. That's one of the reasons that birds likely have feathers, but also perhaps for display, mating, etc. So We don't know what color pteranodons were, but people often portray them as being very colorful. So they're both four-limbed, which means they're tetrapods. And the thing that most people think is, and you'll be able to bust a little myth here, pterosaurs, which is the group, the Pterosauria, which includes pteranodon and other pterodactyls that come later, they are not dinosaurs. They're very closely related, and they both belong in a group called ornithodires, but they don't have dinosaurian characteristics specifically. So one more possible dinosaur, one more animal that people think is a dinosaur bites the dust. Can I also give a spoiler? Jurassic Park, the giant mosasaurus that is made super huge, bigger than it is, the animal that comes up out of the water and I don't know what it grabs, but it eats something. You guys know what I'm talking about? Also not a dinosaur.
I can picture that scene. That's not a dinosaur either, Professor
Nope.
Whatley?
That is a marine lizard.
Wow,
So,
sounds like Jurassic Park needed you on staff to, fact check.
Jurassic Park, the early ones did a great job, actually. I am having trouble finding my little forward button.
That's okay.
It worked. Okay.
Go.
Okay, so here are some wonderful feathered living dinosaurs. And it's just really fun to think about being able to see animals that have dinosaurian characteristics still running around that you could see on the television, that you can see in your backyard, that you can see at the local zoo. These theropod characteristics live on. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the characteristics that really do continue on in the birds that we see when we look out of our doors. I love seeing sparrows actually just sort of all together on the ground, pecking away. It just makes me think of herds of dinosaurs. And so this is actually a very early dinosaur. Some of the earliest known are from Argentina and others in South America. And they have one of those characteristics I was talking about. If you look at the teeth, they look very sharp. They're kind of recurved or curved backwards. I'm thinking if this animal took a bite out of you, it probably, could hold on to you pretty well. And one thing that I will just point out, this is the skull, right, with the lower jaw. On the left side is the nostril. The next hole is called an antorbital fenestra, meaning it's in front of the eye. The largest hole is the orbit, so that's where the eye would have been. And behind that, there is an additional opening, then the neck. Okay, poll question number 2, and I think I might have given it away.
All right, let's see. This one is all about bird species. How many species of living birds are there? And if you've been on with us before, you should know the answer to this because I think it might have come up before, as we are always talking all about birds. So 30,000, 10,000, 5,000, or 1,000. Let's see what everybody's saying. Now is your chance to vote. So Robin, while people are voting on how many species of birds there are, how many species of dinosaurs do you think there were all together?
That's such a great question, and I thought I knew the answer to it, so I wanted to go back and check. And the latest tally, you're going to be surprised by this, I think, is there are 700 known fossil species of dinosaurs, 700. and
Wow.
300 genera. So that doesn't sound like a lot, really, but there are some reasons for that, and I'll talk about that.
All right, it looks like most of our audience has finished voting in this trivia. So let's see. We're going to show our results here. So 38% of you are saying there's 30,000 species of living birds. 62% of you are saying 10,000 species, and nobody voted for 5,000 or 1,000. So, Professor Whatley.
Well, B is correct. And if I can advance to the next slide, I'll show you the breakdown of living animals on Earth. Let's try it here. There we go. So it's almost 10,000. Can everybody see this? There are quite a number of amphibians, many, many more fish species. And when we say vertebrates, we mean animals with skeletons, with bony skeletons. Mammals, about 5,400, reptiles, 8,200. So around 60,000 animals with bony skeletons. And I read something recently that said that, I think it was from the IUCN Red List. It said, and this might be a little bit dated, but it said that there are about, I'm trying to remember. I want to say it was like 10,000. This can't be true, right? 10,000 new species discovered a year. I know that there's been a big project to look at the world's oceans, especially a few years ago, the Atlantic Ocean, and they discovered many, many thousands of species. So what it's suggesting here, and I had seen this previously, is that the total number of species on Earth that are known, that doesn't mean that there aren't more, is a little over 1.5 million. So many of those are animals with non-bony skeletons, invertebrates that live in the earth, in the oceans, in freshwater, and then, of course, plants. Okay, so everybody knows what this is, right? So this is a feather, and this is a feather from Archaeopteryx, which is probably the most famous fossil bird and the first that was known. It is from about 150 million years ago, and it was found in these really special deposits from Bavaria, Germany, southern Germany. So this was the first fossil of what was considered to be a bird, because it is a feather, right? It's pretty distinctive. And shortly thereafter, so the feather was found in 1860. Shortly thereafter, there was a partial skeleton that was found. And Richard Owen, who is a very well-known paleontologist who worked at the British Museum in London, described the specimen. And the deposits are really interesting because they're a special kind of preservation, of sedimentary preservation. It's called a Lagerstätten. And these particular deposits are known as the Solenophthane lithographic limestone because they were taking lithographic stones, they were quarrying them out of the deposits so that lithographs could be made. That's how fine the sediments are. These are a lagoonal environment, and there are many, many, many other kinds of animals that are found in these sediments as well. So when this specimen was discovered, people were really excited about it because the paleontologists and people who were biologists knew that, one, it had characteristics of birds, but two, it also had characteristics of reptiles. And Darwin was said to have been very excited to see the specimen itself and to know more about it because basically they considered birds to be kind of an orphan. There were no known relatives in the fossil record. So a few years later, a really beautiful skeleton was found, and it is this specimen, the Berlin specimen, which was described at the museum in Berlin from same sediments. You can see how fine they are, and you can see a lot of detail here. Let me see. So let me, while you're looking at this, ask Holly to bring up question number 3, but if you could just wait a minute and really have a look at the skeleton before you answer the question.
Okay, we have all of our observers checking out this skeleton because you will need to use those observational skills for this next poll question. So we'll give it just another minute here. Observing is an important science, right?
I'm sorry, can everybody see the wings spread out? How beautifully the impressions of the feathers are shown? It's really amazing. And Lagerstättens are super special because they do actually sometimes preserve soft tissue.
It really is amazing how you can see that delicate impression in so much detail. This is exciting. Should we go ahead and launch the poll question then?
Sure.
Robin, I'm going to let you go ahead and read this one off because I don't know how to pronounce the name and I don't want to mess it up.
Okay. How does Archaeopteryx, and archaeo means ancient and pteryx means wing, how does Archaeopteryx differ from a living bird? Select one of the following. A, it has a long tail. B, it has long fingers. C, it has both A and B. D, I have no idea.
I like that I'm seeing some I have no ideas come in because that's right around what I'm feeling right now with this question. But it's, you know, we will soon find out, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
So tell me how to pronounce
Archaeopteryx.
Archaeopteryx. You just pronounce all of the letters as you see them. Archaeopteryx.
Yep, and it's a species name. So typically when it's written, it's italicized. So the genus, this is the genus name. So the genus and the species are typically italicized.
Interesting. Okay, it looks like just about everybody has voted in this final poll question. Let's share the results. So it looks like about 50% is saying has both A and B, 25% says it has the long tail, 15% says has the long fingers, and D says, I have no idea, and that's fine too. So let's find out what our answer is.
Yeah, so if you look at this, you can see that Archaeopteryx does have a long tail, and it does have really long fingers. And if you can think about a chicken, perhaps, if you happen to be someone who eats chickens, or if you've ever seen a chicken skeleton, the tail is super short, and that's typical of living birds. And the other thing is, not to give too much away, but living birds really do fuse and shorten their fingers. So this animal, Archaeopteryx, has very long fingers that look a lot more like dinosaurs. So I'm going to move on to the next slide if I can figure out how to do this. There we go. Okay, now here's the kicker. This is a close-up of the Archaeopteryx skull. And question, do birds today have teeth? Answer, no, thank goodness they don't. Can you imagine? Those beaks are sharp enough. But this animal does have teeth. And being about 150 million years old and having other features of dinosaurs suggests that, and we know that most dinosaurs also had teeth, and teeth are actually an ancient feature of tetrapods that this animal is basically a descendant of animals that have come before it, and birds have lost their teeth. So here is a non-avian dinosaur that has really similar characteristics to Archaeopteryx. It looks a lot like Archaeopteryx. So if you remove the feathers from Archaeopteryx, it would look a lot like this animal. This animal has a little bit shorter hands, but it's got a long tail. It's got pretty long arms. It's got an S-shaped neck, which is kind of typical of theropod dinosaurs. It's pretty small in body size, and I should say that Archaeopteryx is probably about the size of a crow. This animal is found whoops, I'm not sure what happened there, is found in the same sediments with Archaeopteryx. So I have some arrows here. There's another feature that I wanted to point out before we go too much further. And if you look at the third arrow, not the one that's pointing at the fingers, not the one that's pointing at the tail, but the one that's pointing to the bone beside the leg. Whoops, that's my dog. We might have eruptive barking. That's pointing at the pubis, which is one of the bones of the hip. There are 3 bones in the hip. And that bone is kind of slanted backward. That's going to be important. So I'm going to move on. So here's a fossil of the fossil of Comscipinators, this animal that looks a lot like Archaeopteryx without the feathers. Just to say a little bit more about these deposits that preserve the Archaeopteryx specimens. Again, they're in southern Germany. They're called a Lagerstätten, and that's a really special kind of preservational, sedimentary preservation. So you can see some of the 7 specimens that were found. There have been many, I feel like I've got a dinosaur growling behind me. There are many more, sorry, that's not correct. There are a few more fossils, some of them quite beautifully preserved, that have been found in the last just few years. So now we're up to 12, whereas for a long time it was just 7, including the feather. So one of the things that you might have noticed if you've ever picked up a bird bone is that they're hollow. And that's a good thing if you want to fly, right? If you want to get off the ground, having a light skeleton is very helpful. But that's kind of problematic for preservation. So if you have thin, hollow bones, then that means they're going to be fragile and they may not fossilize very readily. In other words, they may be damaged or degraded before they can be fossilized. So there have not been tons of bird fossils until relatively recently. People are learning how to look for them in a better way. That's one thing, and people are getting around all over the place more actively, and there are more paleontologists in countries across the world looking for fossils. Okay, so what actually is a bird? So what are some of the evolutionary novelties, meaning traits that only birds have that distinguish them from other vertebrates, including dinosaurs? One of those is they lose their teeth. They have teeth early on, and then over time they kind of get rid of them. Teeth are heavy, so flying with teeth is probably a little bit more of a delicate balance than without them. They tend to fuse the bones in their skeleton and make their skeleton really rigid, which is a good thing if you're moving through the air. It's kind of like, it reminds me, it's different, but it reminds me of a fish going through the water. They don't have a lot of actually movement to their skeletons. So what birds have done is they've fused the bones in their wrist and shortened the bones in their hand, and you can see a modern bird arm on the lower right of the screen with the bones of the wrist and hand, the carpa metacarpus, are reduced, and the bones of the fingers 1 and 2 are fused, and then that phalanx, which is the first digit of your hand, meaning the thumb. So it goes 1 for the thumb, 2 for the index finger, 3 for the middle finger, 4 for the ring finger, and 5 for the pinky, are really reduced and fused. They also fuse the bones in their foot, and we'll see that a characteristic of theropod dinosaurs is that they lose the big toe and the pinky toe. So now we've got what looks like a 1, 2, 3 hand. You can see that in the Archaeopteryx wing, and then the fused fingers below. A 1, 2, 3 hand, so the first, second, and third fingers, and you've got a 2, 3, 4 foot typically, with these really fused bones. They also make their trunk really rigid where the hip bones meet the vertebra, so it's one rigid piece. You probably have noticed that. And they reduce the tail into just a few little vertebrae, and it's called the pygostyle. So I'm just going to talk quickly through how it is that we look at these characteristics and try to understand how animals are related to each other. So this is kind of a simple branching diagram. And you can see that the red dots here on this branching diagram are where these branches come off of a main trunk. You can think of it that way. The red dots represent characters that are evolved and are present in the descendants. So for example, if I look at the jawed fishes, animals, the fishes with jaws, they develop a bony jaw with teeth in it eventually, but they develop a bony jaw, and that helps them to eat. And some of them are really scary early on and huge, big as a bus. And we know that every animal that comes after that animal with a bony jaw early in the evolutionary history of vertebrates has a jaw, right? So that feature shows up. The group that first has it, and then everybody who comes after has it. So amphibians have a lower jaw, a bony jaw. Reptiles have a bony jaw. Birds have a bony jaw. They have lost the teeth. And then mammals have a bony jaw. Then if you go down it's going up the tree, amphibians have improved lungs for breathing air and moving out onto land. Reptiles have claws. Birds have specific feathers, right? The group of birds has feathers, but they also share claws, nails, lungs, and jaws, and mammals have fur and mammary glands. So the groups are defined by the evolutionary novelties that are found only in the group, but they share these ancestral features as well. And one thing that I wanted to show that's kind of it's a good example of this if you think specifically about the skeleton. All of these animals that you're looking at here, birds, pterosaurs, and bats, are tetrapods. So they all have these bones of the skeleton that are embryological precursors, and they may change and do different things, and they may be used differently for flight, but the bones themselves show us that these animals have a common ancestry. They're all descended from an early tetrapod that had 4 limbs. And every tetrapod with a bony skeleton has a humerus in the upper arm, a radius and an ulna in the lower arm, and then they have wrist bones, and they have the upper hand bones, the metacarpals, and then the digits in the hand. They take a different form depending on how they're using them in their environments. And so just thinking about flight, one of the things that if you want to think about these animals that are not super closely related, but they are related way back down the line from their tetrapod ancestors, is that the pterosaurs are the sister group. They're very closely related to the earliest dinosaurs, but they're not a dinosaur. So the first flying animals are the pterosauria, which leads later to pterodactyls, which go extinct at the end of the Cretaceous when non-avian dinosaurs go extinct. And so the pterosaurs empowered flight shows up in animals with skeletons at the earliest at around 220 million years ago. Birds then developed powered flight around 150 million years ago, and then bats, which are mammals, come on the scene and develop powered flight around 55 million years ago. So you've got animals that are using they're elongating their 4th finger, their ring finger, and the wing is attaching to it. That's how pterosaurs are mainly doing powered flight. Birds are using they're fusing their fingers, but they're using mainly their arm for powered flight. And then bats are actually extending the digits in their hands. So they're really using their fingers for powered flight. So it's pretty interesting. Okay, so this is another branching diagram. And remember that each one of these red dots represents these evolutionary novelties of the groups that come after them. They're present in the groups that come after them, right? So there are a bunch of features here, and I know that you may not know what some of these are. Some are pretty obvious. But if you look up at the top, you can see that every one of these animals is a tetrapod. It's got 4 limbs, even though birds are changing the way those limbs look. They're shortening. They're using their arms for flight, but they still have 4 limbs, right? They may be standing on 2 legs, and that is actually a characteristic of theropod dinosaurs. They tend to go bipedal, and they put most of their weight, or they put their weight mainly on their lower limbs to support their bodies, kind of like we do. It's a convergent feature for carrying weight. So what I want to do is kind of move forward and show you just some of these features that we then see in fossil birds, and some continue in living birds. So this is the group of theropods, which is the meat-eating dinosaurs. If you remember, there are Ornithischian dinosaurs, which are called the bird-hip dinosaurs. That's a complicated one, but they're all extinct, and they were herbivores. And then there are the Sariskian dinosaurs, which is composed of sauropods. You can see up at the top, the 4-legged animals like Apatosaurus that you can see at the Field Museum, huge, some of them. And then the theropods, the meat-eating dinosaurs like T-Rex and Velociraptor and eventually birds. So theropods have these recurved teeth. The teeth curve back. You can see that kind of light serration that's running down the left-hand side. They're really meant for eating meat. And this is a T-Rex tooth. It's huge. A lot of the bottom part is the root that goes in the jaw. They shed these teeth and then regrow them. Another feature is what I was talking about before, the 1, 2, 3 hands. So they basically lose the 5th finger and they reduce the 4th finger. So it's the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd hand. This particular dinosaur actually is from Mongolia, and I think it's only known from the arms, which are kind of crazy. You can see the big claws. And then the 2, 3, 4 foot. So basically, as I said before, this is a characteristic of theropods. The first toe and the pinky toe are removed. And so what these animals are doing is they're basically making their legs into hinges. So the feet have a very reduced ankle. There's not a lot of movement there, unlike something like a crocodile or a lizard. And they're able to run and move more agilely by not having these other toes in the way. You can think of a horse, you know, they reduce their digits to 1. It's not quite as extreme as that. And then another characteristic is that the bones tend to have these larger marrow spaces. And then we see that really exaggerated with birds being super thin-walled. Pterosaurs have a convergent feature. They have very thin-walled bones, and that's not a surprise because they also fly. This is kind of an interesting characteristic of theropod dinosaurs, and it is an ancestral feature, not an evolutionary novelty. So the top bone in the hip is the ilium. The bone that points toward the head is the pubis. You have these bones, but they're modified. They look different. And the backbone is the ischium, the one that points toward the tail. We're going to see that the positioning of these, especially the pubis bone, is actually something that tells us about the evolutionary history of birds, and especially Archaeopteryx. So you're looking at a group of theropods, and I'll talk a little bit about the features of Solarosaurs. Comscipinators is that animal that looked a lot like Archaeopteryx. You saw the fossils of that animal in the Lagerstätten, the Solenophthane limestone. You can see that if you just take a gander at these skeletons as we go across the screen from left to right, you can see that the arms are really long on the Manaraptors. The hand bones are actually pretty long. They have super long tails. Those are relatively small animals. They're runners. They have sharp teeth. They're probably predators. We know they're theropods. Then as we go forward in time with the Manaraptors, you know, we're getting more and more kind of bird-like actually, until you come to animals like Caudipteryx, and further on, even more bird-like, and in fact, fossil birds have feathers. So there are some dinosaurs that actually do, theropod dinosaurs that do have feathers. Some people think that T-Rex had feathers. There's some evidence for that. So we've got the fossil birds, people will refer to as aviali, and they make a distinction between that and the living birds, the aves. Some people don't make a distinction, but some are dead, they're extinct, and then we have the living birds, which are called the crown group. This is the skeleton of Comscipinators. And that's a Solarosaur. These are some of the features of Solarosaurs. That means hollow-tailed lizard. They kind of stiffen their tails, still have long tails. One of the characteristics of Solarosaurs is that they have a wishbone. It doesn't have the bony protrusion on the bottom, but The clavicles, which are the two bones that if you take your hands and you feel your clavicles, they're separate bones. But in Solarosaurs, those bones are fused and they become a place for attachment of muscles and eventually flight muscles. They have a long, sort of narrow foot. Their brains are actually, we see that the brains and the brain cases are enlarged. Their arms get longer, and they have this bony plate in the chest. So the sternum, and birds, especially birds that are major flyers, have a protruding keel on that, but not these animals. These are dinosaurs. So here's a furcula in an Oviraptor, which is a very bird-like Manaraptor. But this bone that looks like a U is the fused clavicles. And so here on the left, we have an example looking down on this animal, a dinosaur with the unfused clavicles, so prior to Solarosaurs, and then the fused clavicles that you would see in Archaeopteryx, actually, and other birds. One more, the Manaraptors. So this is kind of important. This is kind of an important branch point because you see these features in these dinosaurs that really lead further to bird-like characteristics that we would recognize in birds today. Manaraptors include, among others, these animals Dromaeosaurids, which Deinonychus and Velociraptor are two Dromaeosaurids. These are animals that I wouldn't want to run into under any circumstances. And you might recognize this photograph. This is a very famous two fossils, actually. There's Velociraptor on the left, and it's fighting with a Protoceratops. And you can see that sort of triangular shape that the arm is going toward is the head, and the mouth is kind of beaked, and it's holding the hand in the mouth. So this is, they're thought to have been covered by a sandstorm. Pretty amazing. It's a three-dimensional fossil. So, so what we see is that in the theropods, they have a pubis that goes toward the head. And if you look all the way to the left, that is the Ornithischian dinosaurs. Their pubis goes back toward the ilium, toward the tail. Those animals, the Ornithischians, are all extinct. They were named bird-hip dinosaurs because they had a pubis that pointed toward the tail. So it's a little bit confusing, but if you look all the way to the right, that is an Archaeopteryx hip. The ilium's on the top, the ischium is pointing toward the tail, and the pubis is also pointing toward the tail. But this is something that we see, the evolutionary changes in the skeletons of these animals. So Manaraptors have a backward pointing pubis, and then that feature is carried forward in all extinct and living birds. So a piece of their evolutionary history that points to the origins of their evolutionary origin as dinosaurs. Another really cool feature is called the Semilunate Carpus. It is this half-moon shaped bone in the wrist. It's highlighted in blue on the upper right. And the thing that's really neat about this bone is that it allows animals to fold their wings. It allows birds to fold their wings, but it also allowed the Manaraptor and dinosaurs like Oviraptor to fold its wings. And this is maybe one of the coolest fossils ever. It's from Mongolia. It's the skeleton of a Manaraptor and Oviraptor. So ova means egg, raptor means thief. There was a mistake because they didn't believe that Oviraptors, they kept finding these skeletons, could possibly have been the bearer of these eggs. But it turns out when they found this nest, they realized it's not the thief, it's the mom. And there's a furcula, the wishbone is actually present, and you can see it up in the top part, the very top center part of the screen. That sort of V-shaped bone is the wishbone. And so this animal is basically folding its arms around the eggs that it's sitting on. The head's missing, and this is a reconstruction. Pretty cool. So behavior shown by the fossils. And then this is another feature that's pretty interesting. This is actually for the attachment of muscles. So if you have eaten a chicken, or if you have looked at a chicken wing in detail, the ulna is bowed outward, and there's meat in between, or there are muscles in between those two bones, and that's not typical of any other animals, a bowed ulna. So I just wanted to show you this beautiful specimen that has been found relatively recently. This is the Twelp Archaeopteryx fossil from the Solenophthane limestone. And if you look carefully, you can see impressions of the feathers. You can see the long fingers with the claws. You can see the backward pointing pubis under the tail, which is kind of bent at a weird angle. You can see the long legs. Probably if we had a microscope or a clearer view, we would be able to see the furcula here. And actually, one thing I'm looking at, I can see that there is a space in between the ulna and in between the ulna and the radius, actually. So the bowed ulna is there, telling us that this is a Manaraptor. And it's a death pose. So often with the death pose, the head is, what happens is the ligaments kind of draw the head back as they dry. And then this is a drawing of the animal, the skeleton. Really elongate arms. So finishing up here, I just thought what I'd do is show you that all of these characteristics are features of birds. It's a pretty nice drawing, actually. And one thing that I didn't talk about is on the ulna, and you can see this in a turkey feather, and you can see it in some Dromaeosaurs. The ulna, the bowed wing that has the feathers coming off of it, there actually are these little sort of bumps on the bone that show where the feathers are attached. And so that's a feature that you can sometimes see in the bone of the animal. You can see, if you look at D, the synsacrum is the fused hip. You can see the pygostyle, the super short tail. You can see in the feet that 2, 3, and 4 are elongate, and 1 is really small. That's called a hallux, that's sort of perching back claw. You can see in E that the metatarsals and some of the metatarsals and bones of the ankle are fused into one bone. That is another way to keep your skeleton rigid. You can see a big bony sternum on F. And in animals, in birds that have powered flight, there's a big keel there. You can see the furcula, so that's fused. You can see an S-shaped neck that reminds us of dinosaurs, of theropod dinosaurs. You can see that the bones in C are actually quite lightweight with kind of bony struts inside, but they're not solid. You can see in B the fused digits. So they have all these characteristics, and including tooth loss. So that's living birds. But when you look at Archaeopteryx and other fossil birds, they have a subset of these because they don't have the novelties that living birds have. So living birds have all these characteristics that their ancestors have that tell us about, some of them that tell us about their dinosaurian history. And then they have these new characteristics that differ actually from Archaeopteryx and some of these fossil birds. So the characteristics that are shown in yellow are actually features of living birds only. But these characteristics shown in red are the ones that tell us about their dinosaurian ancestry. Okay, so we might be going a little bit long here. I just thought I'd show you some fossil dinosaurs. Maybe a talk about feathers and feather color and what they're doing with their wings is another talk entirely, because just getting through the evolutionary part is one thing. But there are some amazing fossils, especially from southern China, the Liaoning province. And these are Manaraptors. They have those features that we're talking about, but they also very clearly have feathers. Here's another. They look like mirror images because the rock was split apart, but you can actually see some of the feather fuzz, and you can see some of the features that we've talked about pretty clearly. And there are 3 main to 5 different kinds of feathers, and this animal has at least perhaps 3 of those. There are some other really interesting animals. This is the very last one that weirdly have feathers on their hind limbs too, so that's potentially a gliding feature. Pretty cool.
Wow, this has been quite an anatomy, like a comparative anatomy.
Sorry.
It's so awesome though to like learn all of this and really see how the evolutionary process has kind of gone on. Robin, this is very rare. I don't have any questions coming in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think because you've done such a phenomenal job really talking us through, and I really appreciated all of the visuals and the images and how clearly they were labeled, and your knowledge, of course, to go along with these images. So I think I got a really great perspective on how birds are avian dinosaurs. We do have a couple of comments. People are saying that they loved this. They love seeing the fossils. And does Chip Whatley sound familiar to you?
Oh, that's my brother. Hi, Chip.
Chip is reminding you that, and if I do not pronounce this correctly, I completely apologize. Mashikasaurus is the vicious lizard.
Mashikasaurus. Yeah.
Mashikasaurus. Very good. So if we do not have any other questions from our audience, I am going to end our webinar tonight by giving you, first of all, a huge thank you, Robin. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Robin.
Really super appreciate
being here
with us.
And Robin, I just want to say thank you again thank you to both you and Holly for organizing this great webinar. So much interesting information, really connecting some important knowledge that I really didn't understand. And now we know you're about your expertise. We're going to keep you connected to Homewood Science Center because
I'm in.
kids are naturally interested in dinosaurs, but it's
Yeah.
such a great entry point to learning all about paleontology, about anatomy, about species. I mean, there's just so many different things. So I'll be definitely reaching out, talk about my little dinosaur exhibit, but also getting you into our shop so that really the community can meet you in person would be lovely.
I
So
would
we'll
love
talk more about that.
I would love that. And I'm actually not a bird expert and I'm not a dinosaur expert. I work on mammals and pterosaurs and all the little animals, the reptiles that are in the petrified forest and during the Triassic that live alongside those dinosaurs. It's pretty cool. So I am thrilled to come and talk about dinosaurs, mammals, birds, whatever you need.
Well, those are all great topics that the community is definitely interested in. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us in this wonderful presentation. And thank you, Holly.
Oh,
Yeah,
always. It's always
thank you
a
so
pleasure to
much.
be online with everybody. Robin, thank you.
And thank you to our audience. We had such a nice audience tonight. I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Absolutely. We have really been connecting with our birding community locally. Now we can also connect with the birding community all across America. Our girls club is actually participating in the City Nature Challenge, and we wanted to put it out there to you. It's on our agenda. iNaturalist City Nature Challenge is coming up. It's a citizen science activity that you can do with your family. All you do is go out, take pictures of plant life, wildlife, insects, whatever it may be, and load it up to the iNaturalist app. So mark your calendars, April 30th through May 3rd. This is a contest. It started as a contest from LA to another city, and now they've expanded to any city open. Anybody that wants to participate can go out and be a citizen scientist and participate in this nature count. And then, of course, I want to remind everybody that we do this webinar series monthly. We're super excited to be hosting All About Birds on May 13th, and that is with a phenomenal guest speaker, Deja Perkins, who's an urban ecologist at the University of North Carolina. She's really fantastic, very passionate about birding, and she's going to talk about Black Birders Week, which was a movement started with a hashtag to make sure that our people of color are really getting into and sharing their experiences out in nature. For all of our students that are logging in and our teachers, you know we give an extra credit code after all of our webinar series. Today's extra credit code is HSC Dinosaurs. So you are welcome to share that code with your teacher as your proof of participation. And then if you're an educator out there, know that your students are coming at you with HSC Dinosaurs. So thank you to everybody for tuning in. We've learned so much tonight about the actual fossils and the anatomy. I thought it would be great to leave you with a short video that I found on the YouTube page for the Petrified Forest National Park on how exactly they excavate fossils. So check this out. Once the video is over, we're going to end the webinar. Thanks again for tuning in with us. We'll see you on Earth Day for our special presentation. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Petrified Forest National Park is a world-class locality for fossil vertebrates from the late Triassic period, and scientists from the park and many cooperating institutions are actively engaged in research here. In this video, we'll join lead paleontologist Dr. Adam Marsh to take a look at the process of fossil excavation. Adam spends a lot of his time searching for fossils that he wrote out of the rock. If he finds a specimen he wants to collect, he'll document it and carefully plan to remove it without causing damage. Today, he will be excavating a small foot bone of a phytosaur that was recently exposed from a known site. In order to stabilize the bone, the paleontologist will use a consolidant or glue. This is a liquid glue that can be applied directly to the fossil. The glue will soak into the porous bone and the liquid will evaporate, allowing the bone to harden or stabilize. Once the bone is stabilized, the paleontologist can work on removing the surrounding rock without damaging the fossil. While removing rock from around the fossil, the paleontologist doesn't want to work too close to the bone. He wants to keep some rock in place, since the rock has already been keeping the fossil together for over 200 million years. Since his goal is to keep the bone stabilized, he'll remove the rock a few inches away from the bone, creating a trench. Once the trench is big enough, the bone is isolated on a rock pedestal. Before making a plaster cast of the fossil, a separator must be applied first. This is because we don't want any plaster to touch the surface of the bone, since it's difficult or impossible to remove later. To protect the fossil from the plaster, the paleontologist first applies a layer of tissue paper, or in this case, good old-fashioned toilet paper. Using a little bit of water and a brush, he'll cover the entire surface with a thick enough layer to protect the fossil during jacketing. Once the separator is applied, the specimen is ready to be jacketed in a plaster cast. The cast is applied using strips of medical bandages coated in plaster. You can think of this as the same process for when a cast is made for a broken arm or leg. The bandages are dipped in water, then wrapped around the fossil layer by layer. We might also use strips of burlap dipped in plaster if heavier material is required. In this case, the small specimen only needs a few layers of bandages before it's thick enough to be durable. Sometimes this process has to be done quickly because the plaster can set quickly on a hot day. Once the bandages are placed, the paleontologist will make sure to spread the plaster evenly so that the jacket doesn't flex when the plaster hardens. After a few minutes, the plaster dries, sets, and becomes hard as a rock. Now that the fossil is held secure with the plaster jacket, it can finally be removed from the ground. In the case of this specimen, a few taps from the chisel and hammer in just the right place will loosen the rock pedestal. The moment of truth approaches, and the specimen must be flipped upside down quickly so that no loose rock falls out. Just like that, the fossil has been safely removed from the ground. Now it's ready to be transported to the lab, where a fossil preparator can carefully remove the plaster cast and surrounding rock to reveal the original fossil.